The crimson halls of the Zephyrian Palace stretched endlessly before me, their crystalline walls pulsing with bioluminescent veins that cast dancing shadows across the polished floor. Ambassador Marcus Chun, that's me, wasn't supposed to be wandering these corridors alone. The protocol briefing had been clear. Stay with your escort, follow the designated paths, and under no circumstances deviate from the approved route. But when your translator malfunctions during the most crucial diplomatic mission in human history, desperation tends to override protocol. The Zephyrian language sounded like wind chimes caught in a hurricane, and without my neural translator, I was essentially deaf to their intricate communication system. 3 hours ago, I'd been confidently negotiating humanity's first major trade agreement with the Zephyrian Empire, representing the expanding influence of what the galaxy had begun calling the empires of humanity. Now I was lost, following what I hoped were maintenance corridors toward the guest quarters. The architecture here defied human logic. Walls curved in impossible directions, floors rippled like frozen water, and doorways appeared and disappeared based on some incomprehensible pattern. My footsteps echoed strangely, as if the palace itself was listening. The Zephyrians had evolved from a species that lived in vast underground cavern systems, and their architectural preferences reflected that origin: organic, flowing, and utterly alien to human sensibilities. I paused at an intersection, consulting my handheld scanner. The device showed 3 possible routes, none of which matched my mental map of the palace. The walls here were darker, more private somehow, decorated with what looked like family portraits, if you could call the ethereal, translucent beings in the image's family. These Zephyrians appeared more ornate than the officials I'd been meeting with, their bioluminescent patterns more complex, more regal. A soft chime echoed from somewhere ahead, followed by a melody that seemed to pull at something deep in my chest. Human music theory couldn't explain the emotional resonance of Zephyrian harmonics, but it worked nonetheless. The sound was coming from behind an archway that glowed with soft blue light, different from the harsh reds and golds of the official corridors. Against every instinct screaming at me to turn back, I followed the music. The archway led to a chamber that took my breath away. Walls of living crystal formed a dome overhead, through which I could see the 3 moons of Zephyria, hanging like jewels in the violet sky. The floor was covered with what looked like grass, but it glowed softly under my feet, responding to pressure with waves of color. And there, in the center of this impossible garden, was someone I definitely wasn't supposed to see. She was tall, even by Zephyrian standards, her translucent skin shifting through shades of blue and silver as she moved. Her bioluminescent patterns were incredibly complex spirals, within spirals that seemed to tell stories I couldn't understand. She was tending to what appeared to be a musical plant, its crystalline leaves producing the haunting melody I'd followed. When she noticed me standing there like an idiot, her patterns shifted to brilliant white. What I'd learned was the Zephyrian equivalent of surprise. We stared at each other across the impossible garden, and I realized I'd just made the biggest diplomatic mistake in human history. Time seemed to crystallize around us like the living walls of her chamber. I stood frozen in the archway, my mind racing through every possible diplomatic disaster scenario. In the 3 months I'd spent preparing for this mission, I'd memorized 17 different ways to apologize in Zephyrian, but without my translator, they were all useless. The princess, because those ornate bioluminescent patterns could only belong to royalty, continued to stare at me with what I could only describe as fascination. Her patterns shifted again, this time to a warm golden hue that seemed to dance across her translucent skin. She set down the strange crystalline instrument she'd been using to tend her musical plants and approached me slowly. Each step she took caused the floor to ripple with soft blues and greens, creating the impression that she was walking on water. Made of light, I expected guards to burst through hidden doorways. I expected alarms to sound. I expected to be vaporized by some exotic Zephyrian weapon. Instead, she stopped about 3 feet away from me and did something that made my jaw drop. She laughed. The sound was like crystal wind chimes caught in. A gentle breeze, nothing like the formal, controlled communications I'd heard from other Zephyrians. It was spontaneous, genuine, and utterly delighted. She gestured to herself, then to me, then to the garden around us. Her patterns shifting to what I'd learned was amusement mixed with something else, relief. "I'm sorry," I managed in broken Zephyrian, my pronunciation probably mangling the words. "Beyond recognition. Wrong ... place ... accident ... She tilted her head, her patterns brightening with what could only be curiosity. Then she did something that shocked me even more than her laughter. She responded in perfect, if accented, English. "You speak my language very badly," she said, her voice carrying the same musical quality as her laughter. "But you speak it with, what is the human word, courage? You speak English?" I stammered, relief flooding through me. "I mean, you speak standard?" "I have been studying your people for many cycles," she said, moving to a crystalline bench that grew from the floor as she approached it. "Your languages, your customs, your fascinating disregard for proper protocol." She gestured for me to sit across from her. "I am Lirelei, third harmony of the Resonant Court, and you are Ambassador Marcus Chung of the Terran Coalition, representative of what my people call the Growing Storm." The Growing Storm? I'd heard that phrase before, whispered, in the corridors by Zephyrian officials, when they thought no humans were listening. It wasn't exactly a compliment. "I should go," I said, though I found myself sitting down anyway. The bench adjusted to my human physiology, somehow reading my body language and conforming to provide perfect support. "I'm clearly not supposed to be here." "No," she agreed, her patterns shifting to something I couldn't interpret. "You are not. This is the garden of intimate thoughts, where only the royal family and their chosen companions may enter. The punishment for unauthorized entry is typically exile to the void realms." My stomach dropped. I really should go. "And yet," she continued, her patterns now cycling through what looked like amusement, "you entered without fear, without hesitation, following nothing but curiosity and music. Do you know what that means in our culture?" I shook my head, afraid to speak. Her patterns shifted to deep purple, and she leaned forward slightly. "It means you have the soul of a true explorer. It means you understand that some rules exist only to be transcended by those brave enough to seek what lies beyond them." Princess Lirelei's words hung in the air between us like the glowing spores that drifted from her musical plants. I sat perfectly still, trying to process what she'd just sighed. In human culture, rule-breaking was often seen as rebellious or disrespectful. But the way she spoke about it, with reverence, even admiration, suggested something entirely different. "I don't understand," I admitted. "Your people are known throughout the galaxy for your rigid protocols, your elaborate ceremonies. Past 3 months of negotiations have been the most formal, structured interactions I've ever experienced." Her patterns shifted to what I was beginning to recognize as sadness, deep blues and grays that seemed to dim the light around her. "That is what we show the galaxy," she said softly. "The face of the eternal harmony, the unchanging order, but it is not what we are." She stood and moved to one of the larger plants, its crystalline leaves producing a melancholy melody. "We have become prisoners of our own perfection." "What do you mean?" She touched the plant gently, and its song shifted to something hopeful. "Thousands of years ago, my people were explorers, just like yours. We traveled between worlds, seeking new experiences, new harmonies to add to our great symphony of existence. But as we encountered other species, we learned that our natural curiosity was often seen as invasive. Our attempts to harmonize with new cultures were interpreted as attempts to dominate them. Asterisk, I thought about the reports I'd read about first. Contact with the Zephyrians. They'd been described as overwhelming. Their initial diplomatic approaches so intense and elaborate that several species had interpreted them as threats. So we retreated, she continued. We built our protocols, our ceremonies, our perfect, predictable responses to every situation. We became what the galaxy expected us to be: formal, distant, safe. And in doing so, we lost something essential about ourselves. The soul of explorers, I said, remembering her earlier words. Exactly. She turned back to me, her patterns now bright with excitement. And then humans arrived in our sector. Your species, with your beautiful, chaotic disregard for proper procedure. Your willingness to try things that have never been tried before. She paused, searching for the word. Audacity. I laughed, surprising myself. Most species we've encountered call it recklessness. Perhaps. But it is also freedom. She moved closer, her patterns cycling through rapid shifts of color. Do you know what your people did during the first formal contact session? Ambassador Rodriguez asked if she could record our ceremonial greetings because, and I quote, they sounded really cool, and her daughter back on Earth would love to hear them. I winced. That was a diplomatic incident, wasn't it? It was the most honest thing anyone had said to us in 3 centuries. Her patterns settled into warm golds and greens. While our officials were debating whether to consider it an insult, I was thinking about how wonderful it would be to have someone want to share our music with their family, not because it was required by protocol, but because it brought them joy. The implications of what she was saying began to sink in. You've been studying humanity because you want to remember how to be explorers again. I have been studying humanity because I believe you are the key to our survival as a species, she said, her voice carrying a weight that made me understand this was more than personal curiosity. Our rigid protocols are killing us slowly. Our birth rates are declining because our mating ceremonies have become so elaborate that few bother to complete them. Our creativity is stagnating because every new idea must be approved by 17 different harmony councils. She gestured to the garden around us. This place exists because my great-grandmother broke protocol. She was supposed to marry a prince from a neighboring system, but she fell in love with the palace gardener instead. They created this space in secret, where they could be themselves without the weight of royal expectations. And now? Her patterns dimmed slightly. Now I am the last of my line, and the Council of Harmonies grows more concerned with my unmarried state with each passing cycle. They have arranged 17 different potential matches, each one more perfectly suited to maintaining our political stability than the last. I felt a strange pang of sympathy for her. Sounds lonely. It is. Until today, when a human diplomat followed music into my private garden and reminded me that sometimes the best discoveries come from the most unexpected encounters. Asterisk, the garden around us seemed to pulse with a life of its own as Princess Liralay's words settled between us. I found myself studying her patterns more carefully, beginning to understand that they weren't just communication. They were emotion made visible, vulnerability displayed in ways that human expression could never match. When she spoke of loneliness, her entire being seemed to dim, as if the light itself shared her sadness. You said your people call humanity the growing storm, I said, trying to redirect the conversation to safer ground. What exactly does that mean? Her patterns shifted to something complex, part admiration, part concern. Your species has established colonies on 47 worlds in the past century. You formed trade agreements with 6 major galactic powers and defense pacts with 12 others. You've gone from first contact to significant political influence in less than 2 generations. She paused, her patterns flickering. Some of my advisors believe humanity represents the birth of a new galactic empire. The weight of that statement hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on individual diplomatic missions, on building relationships, one species at a time, that I'd never considered how our collective actions might appear to older civilizations. Is that what you believe? I asked. I believe humanity is doing what my people forgot how to do. You're growing, changing, adapting. You make mistakes, learn from them, and try again. Most importantly, you don't wait for permission to exist in the galaxy. Her patterns brightened with what I was learning to recognize as respect. The question is, what kind of empire will you become? I thought about the various human colonies I'd visited, the trading posts and diplomatic stations spreading across our sector of the galaxy. We'd told ourselves we were explorers, pioneers, but from the outside, we're not trying to build an empire, I said, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. All empires begin with good intentions, she said gently. The Zephyrian Empire started as a confederation of worlds seeking mutual harmony. The Karathi Dominion began as a trading network. The Vex Collective was originally a scientific research partnership. Her patterns shifted to deep purples and grays. Power has a way of accumulating, even when you don't intend to gather it. So, what are you suggesting? She stood and moved to a section of the garden I hadn't noticed before, a crystalline pool that reflected not the moons overhead, but what looked like star maps. I'm suggesting that humanity has a choice to make, and that choice will determine not just your species' future, but the future of every species you encounter. She gestured to the pool, and the star maps shifted to show human colonies connected by glowing lines of trade and communication. You can continue on your current path, growing, expanding, accumulating influence until you become just another imperial power ruling through economic and military might. It's the path of least resistance, and it's what most of my advisors expect. The map shifted again, showing the same network, but with the connections pulsing in different colors, more organic, more alive. Or you can choose to be something different. Something that has never existed in galactic history, an empire. That empowers rather than conquers. That encourages diversity rather than demanding conformity. And how exactly would that work? Her patterns brightened with excitement. By remembering what made you explorers in the first place. By maintaining the curiosity that brought you into my garden tonight. By refusing to let protocol and procedure replace the human impulse to connect, to discover, to grow. I stared at the shifting star map, trying to imagine what she was describing. You're talking about completely redefining what it means to be a galactic power. I'm talking about saving my people from the prison of their own perfection, she said, her voice carrying a passion that made her patterns flare like miniature suns. And I'm talking about preventing your people from building the same prison for themselves. Why are you telling me this? I'm just one diplomat. She laughed, that crystal wind chime sound that was becoming familiar. Just one diplomat who followed music into a forbidden garden. Just one human who chose curiosity over caution, who spoke honestly instead of hiding behind protocol. Her patterns settled into warm, steady gold. Do you know what the most dangerous thing about empires is, Marcus Chun? I shook my head. They forget that they started with individuals making individual choices. They convince themselves that they're too big, too complex, too important for any single person to make a difference. She moved closer, her patterns now cycling through colors I'd never seen before. But every empire rises or falls based on moments like this one, when someone chooses to break the rules, to speak the truth, to bridge the gap between what is and what could be. The implications of what she was saying began to crystallize in my mind. You're not just talking about cultural exchange or trade agreements. You're talking about revolution. I'm talking about evolution, she corrected. A chance for both our species to become something greater than what we are alone. The moons of Zephyria had shifted position while we talked, their combined light now casting long shadows across the garden. I realized we'd been speaking for hours, but time seemed to have no meaning in this impossible space. Princess Lirale stood at the edge of her crystalline pool, her patterns now steady and bright, as if our conversation had recharged something fundamental within her. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice carrying a weight that made me straighten. In my seat. Tomorrow's negotiation isn't really about trade agreements. My diplomat's instincts kicked into high gear. What do you mean? The Council of Harmonies has been debating humanity's future role in our sector for months. Some want to establish you as a junior partner in our existing power structure. Others want to limit your expansion before you become a threat. Her patterns shifted to something that looked like determination mixed with fear. Tomorrow, they will ask you to choose. Accept a formal protectorate status under Zephyrian oversight, or face economic and military containment. The blood drained from my face. That's not a choice at all. That's an ultimatum. Exactly. And it's the kind of thinking that has trapped my people in stagnation for centuries. She turned to face me fully, her patterns now blazing with an intensity that made the garden around us seem dim by comparison. But there is a third option, which is challenge the ultimatum. Refuse to accept the premise that humanity must be either controlled or contained. She moved toward me, her patterns shifting to something I'd never seen before, complex spirals of color that seemed to pulse with their own life. Propose something that has never been tried before in galactic politics. And what would that be? A true partnership. Not a trade agreement or a defense pact, but a genuine collaboration between species. A formal alliance based on mutual growth rather than mutual exploitation. Her patterns stabilized into brilliant white. And make the proposal in a way that demonstrates exactly why humanity represents something new in the galaxy. I felt a strange mixture of excitement and terror. You want me to break protocol? Again. I want you to be human, she said simply. I want you to show my people what they've forgotten, that the most important diplomatic tool isn't ceremony or protocol. It's the willingness to be vulnerable, to take risks, to trust that the other party wants to find a solution as much as you do. And if I fail, if the Council rejects the proposal, her patterns dimmed slightly. Then humanity will face the same choice every growing power faces: submit to existing authority or fight for independence. But if you succeed, ... She paused, her patterns brightening again. If you succeed, you'll have created something unprecedented. A galactic power that grows through cooperation rather than conquest. I stood up, my mind racing through the implications. You're asking me to bet the future of human expansion on a single diplomatic moment. I'm asking you to remember that every empire, every species, every individual reaches moments where they must choose between who they are and who they could become. She moved closer, her patterns now cycling through every color I'd seen that night. You walked into my garden by accident and reminded me that sometimes the best discoveries come from breaking the rules. Now I'm asking you to break the biggest rule of all, which is that power must be taken rather than shared, that growth must come at someone else's expense, that the galaxy isn't big enough for multiple species to thrive without one of them dominating the others. I thought about the human colonies I'd visited, the excitement and hope I'd seen in the faces of families building new lives on distant worlds. I thought about the Zephyrian officials I'd met, trapped in their own perfection, longing for something they couldn't name. I thought about the choice Princess Lirale was offering, not just to me, but to both our species. What would you do? I asked her, if you were in my position. Her patterns settled into the warm gold I'd come to associate with her laughter. I would remember that the most important word in any language is yes. Yes to possibility. Yes to risk. Yes to the chance. And we might create something better than what we inherited. As if responding to her words, the musical plants around us began to harmonize, creating a melody that seemed to capture everything we'd discussed: the loneliness of isolation, the excitement of discovery, the hope of connection, the fear of failure, and underneath it all, the persistent rhythm of possibility. "The council meets at dawn," she said. "You have until then to decide not just what you'll say, but who you'll choose to be." I looked around the garden one more time, at the impossible beauty of a space created by someone who chose love over protocol, connection over control. Then I looked at Princess Lirole, whose patterns now seemed to pulse in rhythm with my own heartbeat. "I already know what I'm going to do," I said. Her patterns flared with brilliant light. "What?" "I'm going to be human, and I'm going to hope that's enough."